Life Audio.
If we don't embrace conflict as just like it's part of life, then one of three things will happen. We will either think you're bad, or we will think I'm bad, or we'll think our relationship is bad.
Welcome to the Faith Over Fear podcast, where we address powerful truths to quiet anxiety and fear, big and small. I'm Jennifer Slattery, and I know from experience the anxiety conflict can create. I suspect you do as well. While it touches every relationship, they don't all make it through to the other side intact. In this episode, author, podcaster, and pastor's wife Donna Jones shares what God taught her about navigating conflict in a way that honors the Lord, honors our values, and leaves zero regret. Join us after this brief message from our sponsors.
For some of us, personal finances aren't just personal. They include loved ones, neighbors, the communities we call home, and the causes we hold in our hearts. At Thrivent, planning your finances is bigger than just money. We help you put your plans into motion and faith into action so you can do more for the ones in your heart. Because sometimes all you need to make a difference is someone to help you make it happen. Thrivent, where money means more. Connect with us at Thrivent.com.
Conflict. Does the word cause your stomach to clench? It's something most of us would much rather avoid, but what if our attempts to avoid conflict lead to more conflict and increased relational dysfunction, hurt, and misunderstandings? Or maybe phrased a different way, what if learning to engage in conflict in a healthy, Christ-honoring way increases our peace and deepens our connections with others, and actually even helps us to live out our calling as the big global church? Well, today I've invited another Life Audio host, Donna Jones, to share the insights she learned while researching her book, Healthy Conflict, Peaceful Life, a biblical guide for communicating thoughts, feelings, and opinions with grace, truth, and this is my favorite part, and zero regret. I need that part, Donna, zero regret. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Jennifer. And actually, that zero regret part was my favorite part of the subtitle too.
It's necessary. I think so many of us have, which we'll talk about in a minute, have regret because we maybe don't know how to handle conflict well. Well, Donna Jones is a national speaker, church planner, pastor's wife, and self-described Bible explainer. I need that. She hosts the weekly That's Just What I Needed podcast and is the author of Seek, Taming Your Family Zoo, and the Get Healthy Bible Study series. She and her husband, JP Jones, make their home in Southern California. And as I mentioned, today we're discussing insights from her book, Healthy Conflict, Peaceful Life, a biblical guide for communicating thoughts, feelings, and opinions with grace, truth, and zero regret. So here's from the back cover. We've all had moments where we look back on conflict, shake our heads, and think, why did I handle it that way? With 3 decades of ministry experience, Donna Jones has had a front row seat and been in the middle of all kinds of conflict, and she understands the regret, the guilt, heartache, and hurt. Plus, you're a mom too, right?
Plus, I'm a mom.
Okay, well, that right there is like
that
enough.
Right there qualifies it.
Right. And she understands the regret, the guilt, the heartache, and hurt that conflict can produce. But she also knows it's possible for God to use those chaotic, painful moments and turn them into opportunities for better connection with those around us. With encouragement, warmth, and wisdom, Donna shows readers how to navigate the stressful confusion conflict can bring and helps them to discover the single most important quality necessary to handle conflict well, communicate thoughts, feelings, and opinions with grace, truth, and like we said, zero regret, be equipped to handle conflict in a God-honoring way by exchanging conflict styles that hurt with conflict styles that heal, and so much more. And actually, for those of you who want to live for Jesus and show the power of the gospel, this also is a hugely important book. And I'm so encouraged that you have decided to join us for this conversation, because I know it's going to hit. Like, we all have conflict. We can't avoid it. and it's coming. And I wonder, how has an unhealthy approach to conflict, how has that impacted you personally?
Yeah, such a great question. Well, I love that we're talking about this, which is funny because nobody really likes to talk about it.
Right.
But there are just three things that are always true about conflict. We all have it. Like there is no one listening, and not me, not you, that doesn't have it. We all have it. We all hate it, right? Nobody really loves it.
Yeah.
But then because we all have it, we all need to know how to handle it in a healthy way.
Yeah.
So, and Jennifer, it's so interesting. All of us want really close relationships with our family, with our friends, with our extended family, with our church body, with our coworkers. And we, by and large, we will have good relationships until there's something that causes a conflict. And that's where things go sideways, right? And that's where it's like our soul gets wonky and the relationship goes sideways, and then just things fall apart. And I'm no exception. So to answer your question, the name of the first chapter in this book is called The Day I Wanted to Burn Down the Church.
As a pastor's wife. So here we go.
Pastor's wife, right? So I was pretty, I thought, oh, whoa, okay, I'm just going to start right out there with reality, because and obviously I didn't really want to burn down the church. I was so hurt by something that happened within our church body, and I was so blindsided by it that, Jennifer, what happened is like everybody, when you're in conflict, it spins around in your mind, right? So you're driving down the freeway and you're thinking about it, like what he said, what she said, what you said, what you wish you'd said. You know, you're making lunch or dinner, and all of a sudden you're replaying the conversations. You're taking a shower and you're going through, like, you just can't get away from it. So I was in one of those spaces, and I thought, okay, I just need to have lunch with my best friend. Maybe she can just help me debrief this. And so I did, and I had been crying before I met her. And so I thought, oh, I'm going to have to keep my sunglasses on. And so we met, and she leans across the table and she goes, how are you doing? And I said, okay, if I'm going to be totally honest, some days I just feel like I want to burn down the church. And she looked at me and she goes, I highly recommend you don't ever repeat that out loud. And again, I was not, I was not. Right. And I love that she was, trying to protect me. But what she didn't fully understand was the depth of pain that this had caused. And because conflict can hurt us really just deeply, when we're hurt, it is really hard to handle things in a holy and healthy way.
Absolutely.
It just is. I don't care how long you've known the Lord. It's just hard. And so I wanted to be really upfront in this book about just acknowledging the elephant in the room, that when we're deeply hurt and we're wounded, it's hard. And God just taught me so much, Jennifer, I look back on that experience now, and I have a whole book based upon what I learned from that situation. And I realized that, God wanted me to share some of the things that I learned so that people maybe wouldn't have to go through some of the things that I went through, because some of the things, honestly, I didn't handle the right way. Some of the things other people didn't handle the right way. And then I had to learn to navigate that. What about if I'm trying to do the right thing, but they're not? So it's multi-layered.
Yeah. Well, and I also there are a couple of things you said that I really like. Well, okay, three things. First of all, I want the listeners to hear you're a pastor's wife. You've been in ministry for, okay.
Over 30 years. Yeah.
And you still felt like there were things you didn't handle well. So I think that's important, because sometimes we read a book and we think, okay, it says do A, B, C, and we're going to be great. Well, it's a process, right? Like it takes time to unlearn unhealthy behaviors and then to learn healthy ones. The other thing that when you were sharing how we ruminate a lot of times on these conflicts, our avoidance of conflict, listening to you talk, I was thinking like how often I have done that. My avoidance of conflict steals so much more of my peace, gets me so much more worked up and anxious than if I just had a conversation. But then the other thing I want to say for those of our listeners who have experienced any kind of like chronic trauma, And when Donna said it's really hard to handle conflict well when you're deeply hurt, and that's going to add an extra layer to those who have developmental wounds that you might be getting triggered without even fully understanding what you're getting triggered in. So I would recommend to go slowly and give yourself grace, and to recognize what Donna said is that it's a complex, intertwined, my hurts, their hurts, the devil trying to get at me, the lies I'm believing, like all of the stuff, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's multi-layered. It really is. But here's the thing. It is multi-layered, which I think sometimes then we go, oh, then it's too deep for me. I can't figure it out. But as I studied the Bible, Jennifer, I was blown away at, number one, how much unity is on the heart of God. I mean, I don't think I fully grasped that. And also how much the Bible has to say about how we're supposed to handle it. So even if it is multi-layered, as I kind of studied that and peeled back the layers, it was like, okay, I may not be able to do unpeel all the layers of the onion, but I can learn, okay, what does God tell me to do? And then I can move forward doing that. And that just gave me so much freedom and kind of tracks to run on in the midst of all my messy emotions.
Yeah. So progress versus like perfection. So instead of like an all or nothing point of view, I think also too, one of the reasons we can be so intimidated by conflict is because many of us have seen it handled poorly, or maybe we have handled it poorly. And so I think that's part of our fear. I know for me, it's been a long process of learning to kind of dial down some of my gut reactions. And once I started learning that, there's still this fear like, well, what if I respond poorly? And so do you think that kind of is a bit too why people are like, I don't even want to go there because this could turn really ugly?
Yeah. And in fact, there is a line that I wrote in the book, and I ended up repeating the same line over and over again because I just thought, this is so true. It's the reason that so many of us think conflict is bad is because we've never seen it turn out good. But a lot of times the reason we haven't seen it turn out good is because that the way that we have handled conflict has been in unhealthy ways rather than healthy, holy, biblical ways. And so if we can flip the script and go, okay, this feels really scary, but here's how God tells me to do it. I'm just going to try it. and then we see like, oh, wow, the wisdom. And then we start to see, okay, that worked out better than I thought that it would. So can I give you a story that might help?
Please, I would love it.
Okay, so I had a friend that we moved away from each other. We lived, an hour and a half or something away from each other, but we still wanted to stay in contact. So we planned to meet for lunch, and it was like a 40-minute drive-ish for both of us. I was super excited to see her. I get just maybe 5 minutes before I arrived at the restaurant, and I get a text. And she says, oops, I'm so sorry. I probably should have texted you earlier, but I'm meeting my husband for lunch today. Okay, so Jennifer, I was like, what? I've taken my whole day to drive, 45 minutes. Now I'm going to have to turn around and drive 45 minutes back. I basically lost most of my day. And I had emotional whiplash, to be honest with you, because at first I thought, wow, that feels super disrespectful. And then it was like, okay, just, you know what, let it go. She's a friend. And then it was like, no, but I mean, why did she wait to the last minute? And it was like, oh, well, she probably didn't. I went back and forth in my mind, right? So as I started processing this, I thought, okay, this isn't the first time that something like this had happened. Not this exact scenario, but something sort of like this. So I knew if I don't say something about this, then what's going to happen is I'm going to get bitter in my heart. And so what's going to end up happening is that's going to infect our friendship, or I might just start to pull away from her altogether because I don't want to get hurt again. And I thought, okay, neither of those is healthy. So I'm going to have to address this. Honestly, Jennifer, I thought, but how, right? How? So I arranged a time for us to FaceTime. And what I thought I was going to do was I was going to lead with telling her how I felt. But the minute I saw her face on the screen, it was like the Holy Spirit just stopped me in my tracks. And it was like, just pause. And so instead, what I did was I saw her face on the screen and I said, hey, it's so good to see your face. I've been missing you so much. And, she said, oh, I missed you too. And I said, tell me what happened yesterday. And then Jennifer, she started telling me the entire backstory about something that had been going on with her husband. And it was like, oh, now her last minute text made so much more sense. So here's the progression of why this worked, is that when we have to have a difficult conversation, we lead with listening. Because it's like, what do we do? How do we say? What do we say? Typically, we think, what do we say, right? Don't say anything. Say something affirming first, maybe like, it's good to see you, or you're so important to me. But then just ask the other person, tell me what happened. Tell me your perspective on such and such, or what are your thoughts on such and such? Because here's where this gets really powerful. We already know our perspective on the situation. What we don't know is their perspective. So when we lead with listening, it gives us the whole picture of what's going on. And then what we say next, we have all the information. So she told me, all the backstory. And I said, oh my goodness, now your last minute cancellation makes more sense. And then I said, do you mind if I tell you how it made me feel? And she goes, no, not at all. And I said, well, it made me feel kind of disrespected. And, of course, I wish you texted earlier, but I understand why you didn't. I wish maybe that you had texted me maybe right afterwards or later that day and filled me in. And I said, can you understand why it made me feel this way? And she said, oh my gosh, of course. And we ended up having, Jennifer, I can't even tell you what a sweet conversation we had. And it was all because I just did what the Bible says to do. If your brother or sister offends you, like, you go to them and you talk to them, and then you get their perspective, and that tells you how to move forward with what you say next.
For some of us, personal finances aren't just personal. They include loved ones, neighbors, the communities we call home, and the causes we hold in our hearts. At Thrivent, planning your finances is bigger than just money. We help you put your plans into motion and faith into action so you can do more for the ones in your heart. Because sometimes all you need to make a difference is someone to help you make it happen. Thrivent, where money means more. Connect with us at Thrivent.com.
I also like that you processed it. I know a lot of times when things like that happen and we've got this inner script that goes on that a lot of times are connected to wounds we've experienced, right? Mm-hmm. That then form lies. And so we can respond to others out of, when you talk about like the self-protection or the lashing out, without really going in saying like, what am I really feeling and why? And then understanding our own. You saw a pattern in your friend, but we also have patterns in ourselves, right? Like, oh, nobody likes me, or I'm just discarded, or we can say a lot of different things. And so I like how you took time, and I would probably encourage listeners too, when Jesus said, don't point out the speck in your friend's eye when you've got a plank in yours, which basically saying, hey, deal with your stuff first. So I like how you process first. And I would encourage people, for me, like, if my heart is still angry and hostile, I've got more work to do, right? Like, I've got stuff with me that I need to work on before I come into that conversation. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. And I think that is a really important thing, that first you look at yourself. And this is really interesting. When I was doing research for the book, I learned a statistic that actually blew me out of the water. So when things happen to us, our minds are wired to make sense of the things that happen to us, right? And so conflict is, that's one of the things that happens to us. So our brains are wired to make sense of, why did this conflict happen? So we assign motives to other people, but social scientists have studied the accuracy that people have when they assign motives to other people's behavior. And what they found is that we are only accurate 20% of the time. And it only goes up to 30% if people are in a close, healthy marriage, which means that 80% of the time, why somebody does something is not the reason we're thinking that they're doing it. So that's why it's really important, like, to get the whole picture, or like you said, first, okay, let me look at how I'm processing this. How is this triggering me? How is this affecting me? And this is really important, Jennifer, to ask myself, okay, if I don't address this, then what will be the outcome? Because there's sometimes that we don't want to address things, right? We're not ready to, the other person's not ready to. Maybe a person has been abusive and we need to put some boundaries. There are reasons that we don't. But I think it's important for us to ask, what will happen if I just don't handle this the way God told me? What's going to be the natural outcome for that? And usually it's not something that we want. So then we go, okay, well, then I'm going to have to talk about this. So how do I then do this in a positive way?
I love that. Well, and I also like, again, how you're just saying it's not every situation is different, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I know for some of my listeners, and you and I had actually talked on a phone call prior, but I'll just give an example from me. So I grew up in a very dysfunctional environment, and I really didn't have a mentor and a mom, like, to understand, like, this is what godly, loving motherhood looks like. And so, unfortunately, I created damage when I was raising my daughter. I did things that wounded her, not intentionally, but just from my own brokenness. And then as I started going to therapy and figuring things out, it took me a long time when I'm like trying to weigh some of those, what to address, what not to address, because I had so much confusion. I had to, like, what is a healthy mom? What's my perspective? What am I bringing into this? And so I just want to encourage our listeners, like Donna said, every situation is different. And if our dysfunction is still pretty tangled within us, then I would suggest a lot of caution and probably getting some guidance from maybe like your pastor or a close friend or a therapist to say, hey, what is reality here, before launching in. Like, I can look back now, my daughter and I are in a great place now, but certain things that I was pretty convinced were really, really hurtful and I needed to address, that I end up saying, okay, I misread that. That was my junk. That was, so I just, again, to process with Jesus, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so good. And you know what, Jennifer, you just actually modeled the most important aspect of handling conflict well. You know what it is?
I've read your book, so I'll let you tell the reader, the listeners.
Yeah, well, it's humility. It's humility. Humility is, it's not a sign of weakness. It's actually the sign of amazing strength, right? Because humility is just strength restrained. Humility is the ability to look inside yourself first. The humility is the ability to see somebody else's perspective. Humility is the ability to listen and not just feel so defensive or explain away, or, humility is the ability to say, oh, you know what? I was wrong. This was on me this time. Humility, and here's the thing, and I just think this is so important, is that humility does not make us doormats. And I think a lot of women, when they think of humility, they think of humiliation. And it is totally different. Humility makes us doorways for conversation, not doormats for exploitation. And somebody needs to hear that right now, because I think a lot of us, especially in the Christian community, we mistake what humility is, and we just become these doormats for exploitation. That's not biblical humility.
Right.
And so we need to understand what that is, and then how to move forward in that.
Yeah. Well, I love how your book, you talk about just doing all of this with Christ, right? And when you talked about when you saw so much in scripture to show God's heart for healthy relationships, to me that's comforting. It's like, okay, this is important to me. I'm afraid I'm going to blow it. Oh, but wait, it's really important to God. He wants me to have deeply fulfilling relationships. He wants me to be healthy and free. So I can trust him to lead me in those steps at the appropriate time. To me, that's just like a balm for my soul.
Yes. Okay. I love that you bring that up because it's almost like God put all these scriptures about conflict and how we handle it in the Bible because he knows, like, we're human beings. That's just going to be part of our reality. And one of the things I think is really interesting is that if we don't have a healthy perspective on conflict, if we don't embrace conflict as just like it's part of life, then one of three things will happen. We will either think you're bad, or we will think I'm bad, or we'll think our relationship is bad. And none of those three things is necessarily accurate. It could just be we're two people in a relationship and conflict is just part of life. Conflict is just part of marriage. It's just part of parenting. It's just part of being human. So it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm bad or you're bad or we're bad.
Yeah. Well, I think too, I'm hearing you talk. I think some conflict doesn't resolve right away, right? So just because it took, it might take, like, let's say you're in a really difficult marriage. If it takes you 2 years to work through it, it doesn't mean the relationship's bad. It means there's a lot of stuff to work through as you move towards health.
Yep, exactly. And this is really important, I think, because this goes back to just even when I experienced this conflict at our former church, is that I made this huge mistake. And I didn't realize as I was living it, that I was making this mistake. But in retrospect, because I bought into the idea that if the other person would just change, everything would be okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Wouldn't that be nice? Like if everybody else could do what we want them to do, and like, that'd be awesome.
I didn't start this. I wasn't the problem. The other person was. So if they would just change, then, life would be, but this was why this was so unhelpful for me, is that I was basically placing the keys to my peace into their hands. Like, if you change, then I can be at peace. And I can't put the keys of my personal peace into somebody else's hands. It's mine. So what I had to come to grips with, I really had to come to grips with this, is that my only responsibility as a Christ follower was handling this situation in a way that Jesus would look at me and say, to the best of your ability, you tried to do the right thing.
Yeah.
And then Jesus would say, I'm pleased with that. So it's not about outcomes. It's about obedience. Because we're not always going to get the outcome that we want.
Right. Well, and what I hear you saying too is we're in control of ourselves, right? We can be the healthiest version of ourselves possible, where then other people's reactions don't impact us so quite to such an extent, right? Like we can say, okay, that's you. This reaction is you, or those words or that behavior is you, but this is me, and this is how I'm moving forward. That's kind of what I hear in what you're saying a bit.
Yeah, exactly. And just basically saying, okay, no matter what somebody else does, I'm going to try to do the right thing here.
Yeah.
And then if I don't, then I'm going to apologize for not doing the right thing here, And so that's just.
Well, and we're getting close to time. So one thing I wanted to make sure to mention, again, Donna and I talked about this prior to our recording, but in the book, you talk about shut down, silent treatment versus lashing out, which can be manipulation. Like a lot of people will use that for manipulation. I did want to mention to listeners, those of you who have experienced any kind of like complex trauma, you may experience shut down or fight or flight. So it might be different. And so just, I think, checking motive of our heart, right? Like, are we doing this to try to manipulate someone's behavior, or are we in a state of overwhelm and need to regroup and kind of connect with Jesus, right? Would you say that's probably a good way to navigate?
Yes. You're very wise when it comes to that. So yeah. And all of us, we have our go-to responses based on our family of origin, based on our personality. We just do. So it's worth it to know, okay, when I'm in conflict, what do I tend to do? In fact, on my website, I have a conflict quiz that you can just take. Yeah, it's just like a 2-minute quiz, and it'll tell you like what your conflict style is. And then there's a little video that gives you some suggestions for moving forward. But it's helpful to know, like, okay, am I an avoider? Am I, am I a competitor? Am I like, what do I do? What do I try to win? Do I just run away? Do I acquiesce and just try to make everybody happy? It's that's helpful. And then if we're in close relationships, okay, what does my spouse do? What's their go-to? How about my kids? What are their conflict styles? Because that can help us move forward with each other.
Yeah, which that must have been a Holy Spirit moment, because I was like, in my mind, I'm okay, that's what I want to close on, because I found that we had so many other things we wanted to talk about, but you're going to have to get the book. To our listener, you have to get the book because there's so many great nuggets in there. But I particularly liked, and I'd never read before, about how we each have our conflict patterns. And that was super helpful. Just your invitation, just like you said just now, to investigate what is my kind of go-to, where did it come from? How do I want to do this maybe differently in the future, and give ourselves grace as we're learning, right? Like, it's going to take time to unlearn old behaviors.
Yes, exactly. And I think, to your point, is that especially when we're in close relationships, if there's a conflict that keeps coming up over and over and over again, like say you and your spouse always argue about finances, or you and your child always argue about homework, your listeners know the conflicts that come up over and over and over again, household chores or something like that. Then if you will just take that conflict that repeats over and over again, and then just when you're not in the conflict, look and go, is there a pattern? Like, are there certain things that I say and then they say, and then I say, and then they say? Like, what's our pattern that causes this to be something that we repeat over and over and over again? And like you said in the book, I kind of offer some solutions for that, but it's really helpful.
Absolutely.
It's a really helpful tool to be able to just take some of the conflict off the table.
Yeah. Well, and you said earlier in the podcast that it can feel overwhelming if we're looking at like this big thing, right? Conflict resolution and all these things. But really, a reader could just go page by page and just start implementing some of the tools and insights and suggestions that you offer, and give themselves time.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know what, Jennifer, I've had people, this is so interesting. I've had couples read this. I had one couple, I live in Southern California. They were in Ohio, and they said, okay, we feel like we are having free marital counseling at our kitchen island, because they're reading through it together. And then I've had other people say, okay, I'm buying this for all my kids. And they have gone through this with their adult children, or even like their teenage kids, and talked about it, because it's something we all deal with, and everybody needs to know how to handle it, in a way that, like we said, is going to bring more peace and less regret.
I love that. Well, this was such a great conversation. I wish we had more time, because like I said, there's so many important, helpful nuggets. So again, to our listeners, you're going to have to get the book. So Donna, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It has been my absolute pleasure.
Aren't you glad you listened to Donna's hard-earned wisdom? Imagine what our relationships can look like, and the drama and anxiety we'll avoid as we learn to respond to others less from a place of wounding or misunderstanding or fear, and instead from our deeply loved and spirit-empowered true selves. If you haven't already done so, I encourage you to subscribe to this podcast. Then you won't miss a single episode. Share it with your family and your friends, and please rate it. That encourages us, and it helps others find the content. I particularly enjoy reading reviews y'all leave. Who knows? Maybe I'll read yours on air. Until next time, may you live as one who truly has been set free.
Hello, my name's Rachel Carmen, and I want to invite you to come over and listen to my podcast. It's called Real Refreshment. For years and years as a young mother, I chased after the wind, thinking that the world could offer me the refreshment I longed for. But it was only when I discovered it in the person of Jesus Christ that I really found refreshment. Come on over and join me as we dig into Bible study. I'll see you there.